Election night is upon us. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Welcome to the endgame. Today's going to be a pretty exciting day because it's likely that we find out how the election plays out tonight. We might not know who the PM is exactly for some time if it is a minority government, given the coalition talk, but right now, let's focus on the final projections before the polls close. The Liberals and the Conservatives are pretty much neck and neck, and they've been that way for quite some time. They're both hovering around 32% support. I really think focusing on each other and going hard with attack ads did not sit well with Canadians, and it caused this low approval rate deadlock. There hasn't been much movement, and the poll data seems to suggest that the voters don't really take too kindly to one particular party. People really want to know more about the platforms and the plans for Canada's future because voters are now more keen to be educated than ever before. That's my personal opinion, but I think it's true. Voters have access to the internet, they're more engaged on social media, there is a constant news flow that they are absorbing all the time, and we can hear a wide range of ideas from differing sources if we really seek it out. Funny enough, certain podcasts and news channels are giving more insight into actual policy and ideas than the candidates themselves. Kind of ironic, I think it should be the other way around, but actually no, maybe not the other way around. Both platforms, the party and the news outlets, should strive to focus more on the policy aspect and debate about whether or not it's good. Attack ads might have worked in the early 2000s, but the fad is fading really quickly. This really can go either way between the two frontrunners, the Liberals or the Conservatives. A couple seats will likely make the difference here, but it seems likely that's going to be a minority government either way. For a majority to occur, some of those projections have to be dead wrong, and flip states have to really flip. Canada is split fairly heavily, and a good chunk of Canadians will be disappointed either way, pretty much like every election. There is a form of polarization here, maybe a mild one, but people are riding really hardly for their party, and the thought of them losing and the other leader winning would feasibly, foreseeably bring about the apocalypse, and they're trying to avoid that at all costs. But the reality is that these parties, they probably don't have the power to do that alone. We have the parliamentary system and the Senate to keep things in check. So either way, I still think we will be in good hands. Now, the NDP is hovering around 18%, and they've shot up relatively high. I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning of the election, they were actually being projected to be worse than the Green Party. The reality is they're still not likely to win anything, but it's undeniable that they made up ground and they put themselves in a position to be involved in these coalition talks, which is positive for them. They can get some of their ideas on the board now and guarantee votes if it comes to that. I think the debates really helped them in this regard. The other parties destroyed themselves on each other, and the NDP just had to state their talking points and basically observe from a distance. The Green is looking at around 7%, and the People's Party is around 2%. These guys don't have too much weight to throw around, but if that's your party, then that's your party. If you look at Quebec, there is some interesting data that I want to highlight though. The Bloc Québécois is nearly tied with the Liberals for winning the most projected seats in that province. The estimate for them is looking at around 33 seats. That's a massive chunk. Keep in mind there are only 338 seats in total. The Bloc may be considered a fringe party, especially in provinces outside of Quebec, but their tactic of specializing in one region might net them roughly 10% of the total seats according to the projection. That's a lot. If they get involved in coalition talks, expect their agenda to be taken quite seriously. People will want them on their side. Now, Alberta is nearly entirely conservative. British Columbia is split pretty evenly, I would say, between the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals. Manitoba and Saskatchewan heavily favor the Conservatives. Ontario favors the Liberals, but the Conservatives still have a formidable support base. I know that the Liberals were trying to destroy that by using Doug Ford as the icon, the anchor, to get people's minds on him and not Scheer, and try to paint them as the same person, but there is still Conservative support. The Atlantic provinces favor the Liberals. The data confirms one thing, and that is that we don't really know what's going to happen. The estimates really are just estimates. It's important that everyone exercise their right to vote. I don't really care who you vote for, just make sure you do it. Regardless of who you support, I would like to believe that we all want the best version of Canada possible, but we alter in terms of what the best path is to get there. That's the only difference. We have the same goal. Once we start believing that our very objective is different, we become adversaries and enemies, very akin to what we see in America right now. Truth be told, politics is complicated, and it does us no good to box people into a group identity based on their preference for leadership. There is any number of things someone might be looking to advance via a particular party, and for someone to assume that's automatically going to be X, or it's because they are Y, it's not productive, and it creates further rifts among our society. We can't let politics be the defining characteristic of who somebody is. There is much more to them than just that. I would also not recommend pursuing the path of an ideologue, and that's in relation to this idea of boxing somebody in as simply a follower of an ideology. Don't do it to yourself either by becoming this ideologue. Parties abide by strict guidelines to establish order and familiarity. It gives us an idea of how they're likely to act as a government. Someone being conservative gives you a rough idea of what they are to like. As a liberal does the same as the NDP and the Green, it's all meant for that purpose. But there's one crucial differentiation though. People aren't like that. It's likely you have opinions that fall to the right and some that fall to the left. The balance is in question. Maybe you're more to the right, more to the left, maybe you're directly in the center. And you have to make a choice. It's not going to be the case that you think exactly as the party handbook and agree with every single policy and every single thing that the politician does who represents that party. That is, unless you've already become an ideologue. Your religion is the party. You believe everything to an absolute. There is no challenging it. Once we speak in terms of rhetoric alone, without substance and thought and original ideas, that's a clear tell sign that the transformation is happening. Don't let it happen. Also, don't be afraid to explore ideas you are interested in, regardless of where they come from. If it's a conservative idea, or a liberal idea, maybe even an NDP or a green policy. Look into that. If they are bad ideas, that will come to light if you engage in debate and talk about it. If it's a good idea, and you can defend it, and it's hard for the idea to be torn down by opposition, well, you learn something new. One thing can be said though, and that is if you don't vote, you really have no right to complain about anything. You didn't use your voice when it was needed, and now you want to complain? It makes no sense. You had your chance to have your opinions heard via the polls and electing the politicians, but you forsake your right as a democratic citizen, so now you have to live with that. Just avoid the guilt entirely by getting up and going to the polls. It shouldn't take too much time, and if you didn't know, let's say you're working during the time of the voting period, your employer is legally obligated to give you at least 3 consecutive hours to make that vote happen. So even if you're working, it's not an excuse because you're going to get paid to go and vote. If the employer tries to hold that right back from you, you can actually get them in trouble. They'll be fined. I think even jail time is possible too. It's taken pretty seriously by the courts, so there's no excuse really. We'll learn about the results tonight. I'm going to give it a day to set in, and on Wednesday, my normal release schedule, I plan on talking about the future of Canada under the newly elected leader, and if we do happen to have a minority situation, I'm going to talk about what the possible coalitions will look like, if they're even going to happen, and where we go from here. I must say though, I was impressed with the level of civic engagement this time around. Let's hope that the interest continues past the election. Politics is not as dry as it used to be. Arguably that might not be a good thing per se, but the sort of interesting factor that surrounds politics has skyrocketed. It's worth keeping an eye on because you learn a lot. You learn about how society functions, you learn about where the problems are, and you can start thinking about how to fix that. All it really takes is a quick glance around the world to realize how lucky we are to live in a democratic society based in Western values like Canada, or even America for that point. There are places like China, where it is an authoritarian government regime, and you don't have that voice. You cannot vote. The leadership is whoever is in power, and they can control that via things like the military, family structure, the hierarchy, and whatnot. The citizens are forced to just ingest that and live with it. If there is injustice, well, that's too bad for you. You try to speak up against it, you try to vote someone else into power, you might die, the politician could die, a lot of misfortune there. Also, maybe even North Korea. That place, people look at it as a joke, but it's really not. It's a dystopian reality over there, led by a tyrannical ruler. In all of human history, this has not been the norm. In the grand scheme of things, the idea of empowering the masses and the regular citizen has only been around for maybe 0.0001% of all human existence. It's either been the most physically dominating person back in the prehistoric times, or it's been the monarchy, the rulers who are simply born into power, and if you try to challenge them, the knights are coming to your house to kill you, or it's been some form of authoritarian government, as we've seen with communism or fascism. It's actually something to marvel at, the fact that we've successfully created a democratic society that functions and is one of the best places to live in all of human history. I would definitely not be quick to take this for granted. So that brings me to the end of today's conversation. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to share and leave a review. You can also find me on Twitter at Perri Platform. I'll see you soon